Imagine living an ordinary life, then one day finding yourself in the exact place where one decision could save lives and change history. That's the story of Esther. Yeah, the Esther of the Bible. And what I love most is that she never set out to be a leader, but she most definitely was. And when most people think of leadership in the Bible, they think of Moses, David, or Paul. But one of the greatest examples of leadership came from a young woman who wasn't trying to lead anyone. She was trying to be obedient. And her name was Esther. And if you've never heard her story, or it's been years since you've read her story in the Bible, I think you'll see her in a whole new way. Esther's story actually begins with loss. She was a young Jewish girl who had lost both her parents. She was an orphan, and thankfully, her older cousin, Mordecai, took her in and raised her as his own daughter. Just imagine that for a minute. No parents, no royal family, no special status, nothing about Esther's life suggested she would one day change the course of history. At the same time, the Persian king had removed the queen from her position after she refused one of his commands. So the king's officials searched the kingdom for young, beautiful women, and Esther was one of them. She didn't campaign for the position. She didn't ask for it. She was chosen. Almost overnight, this orphan became queen. But there was one important detail. Mordecai had instructed Esther not to reveal that she was Jewish, so no one in the palace knew. Okay, now enters the villain of the story, a man named Haman. Haman was promoted to one of the highest positions in the kingdom, the king's first in command, and everyone was expected to bow before him, a rule he created, and had the king sign off on it. And everyone did as they were told, except for Mordecai. Mordecai refused. Not because he was stubborn, but because his faith wouldn't allow him to give that kind of honor to a man. He only bowed to Yahweh. Well, Haman's ego couldn't handle it. Instead of simply taking his anger out on Mordecai, he decided he wanted to destroy every Jewish person in the entire kingdom. Well, one man's wounded pride became a plan to wipe out an entire people. And suddenly, Esther's own people were marked for death. When Mordecai heard the news, he sent a message to Esther. He told her she had to go before the king and plead for her people. But there was a problem. You couldn't simply walk into the king's presence. Even the queen couldn't. And if the king hadn't invited you, you could be put to death. Esther hadn't been summoned by the king for 30 days. She knew exactly what the risk was. Then Mordecai sent one of the most powerful messages in the entire Bible. He said, "Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" I love that. Because sometimes we spend so much time asking, why am I here? Maybe the better question is, what if my Heavenly Father placed me here for this very moment? Esther could have stayed quiet. Honestly, many people probably would have. She could have protected herself. She could have hoped no one would ever discover she was Jewish. She could have convinced herself that someone else would step in. Instead, she told Mordecai to gather all the Jewish people and fast for 3 days. She and her servants would fast and pray too. Notice what she didn't do. She didn't panic. She didn't react emotionally. Before she acted, she prayed. She sought Yahweh for guidance. And then she made one of the bravest statements in scriptures. If I perish, I perish. Some of the greatest acts of faith begin with the words, I'm afraid, but I'm going anyway. After the fast, Esther entered the king's court. The moment had come. Would he reject her? He didn't. Her life was spared. But here's something I love about Esther's wisdom. She didn't immediately blurt everything out. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet. Clever girl. Then, instead of making her request, she invited them to another banquet. She understood something many leaders miss. Timing matters. Sometimes wisdom isn't speaking first, it's knowing when to speak. At just the right moment, Esther finally revealed the truth. She told the king she was Jewish. She told him someone had planned to destroy her people, and then she revealed who was responsible: Haman. The king was furious. Haman's evil plan was stopped. The Jewish people were saved, and history changed because one woman chose courage over comfort. Here's what I love most about Esther. She never stood on a stage. She never commanded an army. She never called herself a leader. She simply used the influence God had already given her. Isn't that what leadership really is? Not having the biggest title, not having the loudest voice, but being willing to do the right thing when it matters most. Maybe you're watching today thinking, I'm not a leader. But are you a parent, a grandparent, a friend, a coworker, someone people watch or ask advice? Then you have influence. And influence is where leadership begins. You may never wear a crown like Esther, but God has placed you somewhere for someone. And maybe, just maybe, for such a time as this. And before I go, let's talk about what changed. An orphan became the woman God used to save a nation. What can we learn? Leadership starts with courage, not a title. And what can you do today? Take one brave step you've been avoiding. It might be the very thing God has been preparing you for all along. And if this story encouraged you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had a moment when you knew God was asking you to be courageous? And if you enjoy looking at Bible stories through the lens of everyday modern life, I'd invite you to come back. Here on Jumping In with Michelle, we're discovering that some of life's greatest changes begin with one faithful step. Until next time, don't be afraid to jump into whatever God is calling you to do.